Hello everybody, it's me, the Friendly Englishman, back with part 8 of Grey Seer. This is chapter 7, Black Dust, Black Death. Iron fingers gripped Dr. Lowe's shoulder, pulling him back, throwing him to the floor. The alchemist could only gape in astonishment as the spectral figure of the intruder stepped between himself and the ghastly monster stealing slowly from the workroom. Even in the clutch of terror, Lowe was horrified by the madness of such an act. Phantom or thief, it was suicide to stand before such a monstrous abomination. "Do not move," the hissing whisper commanded, the force of the voice brooking no dissent. The grey-shrouded figure threw his arms wide, his splayed fingers pointing to the ceiling. Strange, rasping words crawled through the air, and Lou felt the coldness of his shock become steadily more pronounced, little beads of ice beginning to form on the floor. More remarkable than the falling temperature, however, was the way the darkness seemed to swell and thicken. Shadows crawled from every corner and crack, swirling about the cloaked man, clinging to him like a second skin. In less time than it took for Lowe's mind to register the fact, the man was gone, veiled in a patch of solid blackness that all but filled the doorway to the workrooms. Lowe's breath came in a ragged gasp. A dabbler in the arcane, the alchemist knew a master of the black arts working his craft when he saw, or failed to see, one. The intruder, the strange apparition who had warned him away from the workroom, was a magister, though whether one of the sanctioned wizards of the colleges or some renegade warlock, he could not say. Lowe quickly forgot his concerns over the wizard's identity and purpose. More important to him, at the moment, was the effect his magic had upon the rat beast. As soon as the wizard bound that wall of darkness about himself, the monster stopped its slow, steady creep into the shop. Its beady eyes blinked. Its head swung about in confusion, rearing up, sniffing at the air, trying to pick up the scent of the prey it could no longer see. Even this sense was foiled by the wizard's spell. Rendered invisible to both sight and scent, the rat beast lost interest in Dr. Lowe and his mysterious benefactor. Almost absently, it swung back around, pawing its way across the floor, its claws scraping deep furrows in the wood. Lowe could just see its verminous bulk as it sniffed and snuffled about his workspace. Sometimes a decayed tongue would flick from its mouth to lick at his tools and instruments. There was more than randomness in what that creature chose to study and what it ignored. With horror, Lowe realized what had drawn the monster to his shop. The alchemist could not restrain himself when he saw the rat beast lurch up, setting its paws on a table so that it could sniff at a cupboard set into the wall. It was here that he had secreted the metal box in which he kept the weird stone Dietrich had left him. When the rat beast's dagger-like fangs began to near at the wood, any last trace of question about its intentions were gone. The monster was after the weird stone. Avarice became terror. A shriek of protest burst from Lowe's lungs as he lunged past the blurred form of the wizard, plunging through the chill darkness and into the workroom beyond. With a roar that would not have shamed a Norscan berserker, the alchemist dashed the vial of acid full into the face of the rat beast as it spun about to snarl at him. The hulking monster recoiled, its fur and flesh sizzling beneath the clinging, burning fluid. Its bulk lurched backward, crushing the cabinet into splinters. The metal box with the stone shard clattered to the floor, little tiny protests rising from it as it rolled away. Instinctively, Lowe started to dive for the box, but once again he felt a clutch of iron close about his shoulder. The wizard's touch snapped the alchemist back to his senses. Terror resumed its dominance of the man's mind. Lowe's eyes bulged as he saw the stricken rat beast rise from the floor, the flesh of its face still steaming, patches of bone gleaming through the corroded skin, its giant fangs made all the more enormous without lips to cover them. It chittered madly, then sprang like a raging mammoth. Lo was flung to the floor by the powerful thrust of the wizard's steely arm. At the same instant, the Magister was fading, his body twisting and shifting as though possessing all the formlessness of water. The lunging monster charged into the space between alchemist and wizard, the place where only a breath before both men had been standing. The rat beast's pounce had it crashing against the wall, its head smashing through the partition that separated shop from workroom. Growling with the fury of a tempest, the monster tugged and tore, seeking to rip itself free of the obstruction. Now the wizard's form became more distinct, as solid and real as anything else in the nightmarish scene unfolding before Lo's eyes. Hissing words slithered from behind the heavy scarf wrapped about the Register's face, seeming to burn with a dark malignance as they escaped from his hidden lips. Again, Lo could feel the atmosphere grow icy. Shadows crawled across the floor like living things, answering the sorcerer's call of their mysterious master. Like jungle pythons, thick ropes of darkness converged upon the rat beast, wrapping about its struggling frame, dragging it down with spectral strength. "The box!" The wizard's voice cut through the eerie scene. A long-fingered hand shrouded in black was stabbing across the room, pointing at the metal casket. But the smouldering eyes of the wizard were fixed upon Lo, burning into his own. The alchemist knew he could not defy the commanding presence. However, as he picked up the casket, Lo's old greed returned. The wizard had returned his attention to the rat beast, using his arcane might to bind the creature even tighter in coils of shadow. For the moment, Lo was unobserved, an opportunity he knew might not arise again. Quickly, his fingers worked the hidden latch on the box, his hand plunging inside to close about the treasure he knew both monster and magister coveted. The instant the box was opened, the scent of what it contained was released into the air of the workroom. No longer faint, the old odour of the stone had left behind on table and scale, but the fresh smell of its own substance. The scent burst through the rat beast's primitive brain like an explosion, sending shockwaves rippling into every muscle and tendon. Even the shadowy coils wrapped about it were not enough to bind its frenzied might. Roaring, shrieking, the rat beast ripped itself free from all fetters, physical and magical. The partition was torn apart by its fury, splinters sent hurtling through the room like gnarled skewers. The shadowy tendrils snapped, seeping into the floorboards as they lost their phantom substance. Quickly, the wizard's dark hands were in motion. Fingers splayed and curled into arcane gestures, arms crossed before his cloaked body. A wave of freezing shadow swept before him, smashing into the rat beast with a pulse of withering force. The monster was bowled over by the mystic energy, thrown across the workroom as though it were a child's doll. Furniture shattered beneath its weight. Floorboards were cracked and splintered. A dozen new wounds opened across the monster's vile shape as the wizard's spell drove it smashing through everything and anything in its way. Its bestial bulk slammed into the far wall, crumpled beneath a heap of debris. Even for the somber emissary of darkness, the magic of his last spell had been taxing. Cloaked shoulders sagged. The hooded head nodded weakly against a chest shrouded in grey. For the first time since setting his eyes upon the Magister, Lo's stunned awe of him was disrupted. The alchemist was reminded that for all his spells and sorcery, the wizard was nothing more than a man who would rob him of his precious Weirdstones. Lo turned his head, snatching a heavy iron flask from the floor beside him. A murderous grin spread over the alchemist's face as he unfastened the stopper and spun back towards the recovering wizard. The colleges of magic had many arcane spells and rituals that could visit horrific death upon their enemies, but so too did the ancient and eldritch alchemist guild. Among the oldest and most closely guarded secrets was that of Napalm, the terrible mixture known as Nehikaran fire. As Lo turned to deal death to his rescuer, the wizard's face turned towards him. Grim and judgmental was the grey gaze of the Magister, his strange eyes biting into Lo like knives of hoarfrost. The alchemist almost faltered, but the realization that he had already removed the flask stopper decided him. The muscles in his arm tensed as he prepared to dash the napalm against the wizard's body. Before Lo could move, the wizard's hand shot forward. Something dark and sharp and thin shot from the black swathed hand. Lo felt a blade of icy pain flash through his gut, spilling him to the floor. Too late he realized that what covered his Magister's hands were not gloves, but an arcane skin of shadow, enslaved darkness that only awaited the merest gesture from the wizard to do his bidding. Faced with Lo's treachery, the wizard had sent a portion of that darkness speeding into the alchemist's body with the precision and deadliness of a throwing knife. Crumpling to the floor, Lo could only groan in horror as the iron flask rolled from his fingers. The gooey, syrup-like napalm was already eating away at his iron prison now that it had been exposed to the open air. Weakened to the point of brittleness, the flask shattered as it struck the floor. Instantly, the back corner of the workroom exploded into flame. Lo shrieked as he was immolated by the blast. The entire building shook like a rowboat in a gale, plaster and dust raining from the ceiling. A roar like that of some caged beast swept through the alchemist's shop, bringing with it a withering burst of heat that banished even the wizard's unnatural aura of cold. The grey-cloaked Magister was sent reeling by the explosion, knocked from his feet, thrown out the alcove and dashed against one of the heavy shelves in the shop beyond with bone-jarring force. The wizard braced himself for the crushing impact, coiling like a serpent within his somber robes, gathering the darkness around him to cushion his body. Knocking the shelf down with the force of his velocity, sending clouds of powder and dust billowing into the gloom as hundreds of vials and bottles shattered, the wizard rose from the tangled debris. His stern gaze pierced the smoky shadow of the shop, watching as flames greedily devoured Lo's workroom. Before the room was lost within a wall of fire, he could see the immense shape of the rat beast, risen from its own jumble of wreckage, madly forcing its way through the smoke and fire, its dull mind still fixated upon the alchemist's box and what it contained. From behind him, a dull crash sounded. The wizard faded into the darkness of the shop, blending his substance into that of the shadows. Another crash, and the front door of the shop burst inwards. Men rushed inside, men wearing the livery of the Altdorf City Watch. In command of them was Theodor Bayer. Contacted by the agitator Ludwig Rothfels, who had lingered outside the shop, Theodor had employed his own initiative, rushing to his master's aid when the same shop had been rocked by an explosion. Now he raged through the smoke-filled shop, trying to fight his way into the flames beyond. "Instructions," a low voice hissed from the smoke. Theodor spun about, trying vainly to find the source of words only he could hear. "Have your men withdraw," the voice continued. "Evacuate surrounding buildings. Contain the fire. Allow Lo's shop to burn. Be careful for anything trying to escape the flames." Theodor could see several of his men already trying to fight the spreading fire with blankets and tools hastily salvaged from the shelves of the shop. The sharp, shrieking cries of someone trapped in the fire rang out, agony twisting them into something bestial and inhuman. It sickened Theodor to abandon someone to such a fate, but, all the same, he knew what duty demanded of him. "I obey," the sergeant said, almost choking on the words. "Search the ashes of this building," the master's voice whispered. "Recover a small metal casket. Do not open it. Do not touch what is inside." Theodor was calling back his men from their futile efforts against the fire, using every bit of his authority to compel them away from the source of such miserable screams. Only dimly was he aware of the lightening of the darkness around him. as though the smoke and shadow had withdrawn from the shop, drawn elsewhere by the presence they shrouded. What was asked of him, he knew. What was expected of him, he knew. The why behind his orders, however, was something Theodore could not fathom. Another in an endless chain of riddles and mysteries he knew were beyond his ability to resolve. Like so many times before, he had to trust the wisdom and intentions of the man who he knew as Jeremias Scrivener. The sharp squeals rising from the sunken pit were ghastly, so eloquent in their suggestion of unspeakable pain and terror that even Grey Seer Thanquol felt a thrill of fear race along his spine. It was like a choir of damned souls as the flames of chaos licked their naked flesh. For all the horror in their screams, Thanquol felt a sense of immense power. The knowledge that he and he alone was able to induce such a hideous fate upon other creatures made him feel bigger than Bone Ripper, more powerful than the Lords of Decay, stronger than the Horned Rat. Thanquol quickly glanced about the cavern-like chamber, guilty eyes staring at each of his minions in their turn, grinding his teeth as he wondered if any of the spying sneaks had guessed the impious turns his thoughts had taken. He fingered the amulet he wore, muttering apologies and renewed oaths of loyalty and service to his god. He had enough enemies to go around. He did not need to add the Horned Rat's wrath to his worries. The incident in the scroll was foremost among Thanquol's concerns. First, Clan Eshin. Then Clan Moulder had made an attempt against his life. Who would be next? Which of Under Altdorf's clans was after his blood? Or perhaps it was all of them working together. Grey Seer Thrakwi had certainly woven a web of intrigue around the other council members long enough to draw upon the resources of each in turn. Perhaps the senile old priest-sorcerer had sensed enough to regret the injudicious discussion he had shared with Thanquol beneath the temple of the Horned Rat. Thanquol did not like being thrust into a situation he could not dominate. The schemers and manipulators of Under Altdorf were better at their game than some rustic warlord clanhold in some forgotten hinterland of Skavenden. He did not have the time or effort to spend trying to ferret out their secret alliances and rivalries to gain the leverage he needed to truly control them. His only hold over them was the talisman he had been given by the Council of 13, and that wasn't enough to dissuade whichever of the clan leaders had decided they wanted Thanquol dead. Or was it Thanquol they wanted? The Grey Seer's pride was such that he didn't like to consider the possibility, but perhaps it was the Wormstone the killers were after. He cast a suspicious look at Viscit Burnfang as the Warlock engineer and his technicians scurried about the work tables, studying a bewildering array of rusty machinery and grimy alembics as they experimented upon the slivers of wormstone that had been recovered from the warren of Clan Mol. The Warlock engineer was attacking the task Thanquol had set him with a good deal too much enthusiasm as far as the Grey Seer was concerned. Not the enthusiasm of a dutiful servant doing his master's bidding. No, it was more the enthusiasm of someone intending to keep his discoveries for himself. Thanquol had seen such base treachery many times. He would keep Burnfang only as long as Clan Scryer engineers were useful. Then it would be time for a little accident. He'd let Cratch handle that when the time came. The Grey Seer shifted his attention to his apprentice. The young adept was trudging through the chamber, buckets of slop and offal swinging from his shoulders. Thanquol had given his apprentice the humiliating duty of feeding the dozens of slaves he had purchased. It would keep Cratch too busy to concoct any new half-witted schemes to usurp his mentor's position and authority. Thanquol hadn't forgotten the accidental shove from Cratch that had knocked the warpstone from his paws just as the wolf rats were nearly upon him. Thanquol smiled evilly. A little while longer, just long enough to be certain his usefulness was at an end and it would be Cratch's turn to suffer an accidental push. Straight into Bone Ripper's mouth. That rat ogre would probably appreciate the light snack. Looking away from Cratch, Thanquol turned his attention instead to the nearest test pit. He stalked towards the depression like a hungry jackal, rubbing his paws together in greedy anticipation. The immense Bone Ripper lumbered beside him, his massive weight causing the earthen floor to shiver. Thanquol had been right to secure such a brute for his bodyguard. No Skaven in his right mind would dare try anything if it meant confronting such a monster. During his spending frenzy in the scroll, Thanquol had lavished his new pet with armor and weapons from the forges of Clan Moors. A thick skin of chainmail protected the monster's head, sheets of the metal falling about his neck and cheeks. Bone Ripper's huge horn had been sheathed with steel to improve both its impressiveness and lethality. A huge bronze shoulder guard was strapped to Bone Ripper's left shoulder, protecting its solitary arm. On a whim, Thanquol had fitted the shoulder guard with a steel spike bigger than his own leg. Woe betide any slinking enemy who was charged by his bodyguard now. Finally, a glove of mail covered Bone Ripper's extra hand, the tightly woven links of metal in turn fitted with fist spikes fashioned from sword blades. It pleased Thanquol to picture what would happen to anything Bone Ripper punched with that paw. Thanquol had not been lax in seeing to his own protection, however. As impressive and fearsome as his new Bone Ripper was, he could not shake the nightmare image of that vile dwarf dropping the first Bone Ripper with a single blow to their head. He could not depend upon a bodyguard alone to preserve himself against his enemies. Thanquol had purchased an elaborate bronze helmet from a clan scab armourer, arranging with the artisan to alter the helm to accommodate the Grey Seer's curling horns. From a clan sleek-it trader, Thanquol had secured a warp steel blade, its blackened edge engraved with deathly runes that glowed faintly with arcane energies. A collar of boiled leather reinforced with iron studs and a lining of chain nestled between layers of fur had been provided by a one-keyed clan school merch. To protect against more magical threats, Thanquol had secured a riotous array of charms and talismans. Little shards of warpstone engraved with protective sigils, rat skulls taken from the sacred vermin of the temple, little bronze icons of the horned rat, an elf-skin mojo bag filled with sacred powders and bones. All of these dangled from Thanquol's belt and the head of his staff. A pair of scrolls written upon the flayed skin of slaves and marked with the scratch script of the Queekish language marked the most expensive of Thanquol's protective measures. Each scroll bore the secret words of a mighty spell, bound into the simple markings and Skaven skin vellum with an awful magic. Only the wealthiest and most powerful of ratmen could afford such potent artifacts, but Thanquol had found a few disreputable dealers in the alleyways of the scroll who'd been able to provide what he needed. The white storm vermin from Skavenblight had seen to it that neither of the dealers would tell anyone what they had sold to who and whom. Altogether, Thanquol felt much more secure in his security, though it would still be prudent to keep some lackwit lackeys close at hand to be put between himself and any sniff of danger. There was danger enough to go around, and the most potent of them all was the one Thanquol could not afford to spare himself from, the Wormstone. For days now, the Grey Seer had been experimenting on the subjects he had secured in the slave markets of Under Altdorf. The results had been as terrifying as they were enticing. To think that Clan Pestilence could have developed such a powerful weapon was unsettling. If the diseased plague lords who ruled the heretical sect had pursued their experiments, they might easily have conquered the entire Under Empire. It was fortunate that their decayed brains had not seized upon the promise of their creation, leaving it abandoned and forgotten until a Skaven of Thanquol's vision and genius should find it. Down in the pit, Thankwell watched the results of his latest test. A half dozen Skaven slaves and a few humans had been dropped into the smooth-walled pit, then exposed to slivers of the wormstone. It had been Bernfang's fiendish idea on how to effect the exposure, securing the shards to thick ropes and then swinging them through the pit like pendulums. It was entertaining to watch the wretches try to escape the swinging ropes. Once a few of them had been hit by the blackish-green rock, there was no need to strike the others. The exposed victims would see to the infection of the rest. It was remarkable the way the infection worked. Once exposed to the wormstone, a Skaven's fur began to become mangy, filthy worm-like growths sprouting from his skin. In a matter of minutes, the Skaven would become insensible from the pain, a twitching, grovelling thing. Fat, green worms would begin to drip away from the Rat-man's body, slithering across the pit, drawn to other Skaven like iron to a magnet. A single worm would be enough to infect a Rat-man, the filthy things burning their way into the fur of their victims. Most dramatic of all was the final stage of the infection, when the skull and organs of the Skaven would burst into a writhing mass of worms. This could take anywhere from minutes to hours, a process Bernfang had not yet been able to fully understand. Humans were not immune to the infection, though they were more resistant to it. Where a Skaven would show signs of his corruption in a matter of minutes, a human might endure for days before becoming sick from his exposure. The end was, if anything, even more loathsome than the fate of the Rat-men, as the human body corroded into a syrupy mush. It was curious that the body of a human did not yield so many of the fat green worms as that of a Skaven, another puzzle Bernfang had not yet solved. The implication was not lost upon Thankwell that the wormstone would make a much more efficient weapon against his fellow Skaven than it would the furless hordes of mankind. It gave the Greyseer pause, exciting both his paranoia and his ambition. What did the Lords of Decay want with such a horrible thing, and could he trust their gratitude that he was the agent of its delivery to them? At the other end of the spectrum, Thankwell saw himself stalking through the streets of a humbled Skavenblight, supreme among the Ratkin, power such as no lone Skaven had ever held clenched tightly in his iron paws. It was a vision that made him almost forget his fears. "Most gracious, kind despot!" a snivelling voice squeaked nearby. Thankwell did not need to turn to recognize the decrepit scent of Scrim Nortail, the clan sneak. He waved his paw, motioning for Bone Ripper to allow the aged Rat-men to approach him. Even so, Scrim kept his eyes fixed upon the hulking rat ogre as he scurried along the imposing monster. "Squeak, squeak, underling," Thankwell commanded. Whatever Scrim was peddling, it was interrupting the Greyseer's observation of the slave subjects. One of the Rat-men was about to burst, and Thankwell didn't want to miss the grisly sight. "Quick, quick!" he snapped, displaying his fangs. "Mighty claw of the Horned One," Scrim whined. "This loyal true servant has found one of the man-things that stole the wormstone." Thankwell spun about, giving Scrim his full attention, slaves and infections forgotten. A greedy gleam shone from Thankwell's eyes. From habit, he drew the little rat-skill box from his robe, tapping a bit of warpstone snuff into his paw. "Squeak, squeak," he repeated impatiently. "One of Clan Skull's business ventures is selling black dust to the foolish man-things in the Overcity," Scrim told the Greyseer. "Our agent among the humans is name-sent Otto Ali. The man-thing runs a dust den where other man-things come to breathe the poison." "They pay to be sick?" Thankwell asked incredulously. He knew that the humans were insane, from their concepts of self-sacrifice to their unintelligent devotion to offspring and birth-king. They even treated their breeders as something more than brutish property to be used and forgotten. But to deliberately inhale black dust, the poisonous residue of warpstone refinement, was such an excessive display of stupidity that he had a hard time believing it.
Yes, yes,
insisted Scrim, bobbing his head up and down.
They pay much, much. Do anything to breathe the dust again.
The crook-backed Ratman's voice faded into chittering laughter.
Clan school use dust addicts much, much.
Thankwell took a pinch of snuff and drew it into his nostrils. Such contemptible weakness was only to be expected from the man-things. Further proof, if any was needed, that the Skaven were the only fit rulers of the world. Clan Skoll had used the weak nature of man-things to swell their own power, gaining a claw-holding under Altdorf that was almost the equal of the greater clans through their network of drug addict dupes and tools. It was such a sneaky ploy, Thankwell was tempted to admire it. At the moment, however, he only wanted to know how it helped him find the Wormstone.
A man-thing addicted to dust came into the warren of Otter Alley, explained Scrim.
The rat man tapped his snout.
He smells scent of Clan Mole Wormstone.
Thankwell clapped his paws together, tail twitching in excitement.
The man-thing is being held kept. No, no, great and terrible priest master, Scrim said. The man-thing was allowed to leave. He saw the fury start to rise in Thankwell's eyes and hurried to elaborate. The man-thing might be suspicious wary if he was kept longer. His dust hunger is much, much. He will be back. Soon, soon.
Good, Thankwell snarled.
When the man-thing comes back, I will smell him for myself. If he leads me to Wormstone, you will be rewarded. If not...
Thankwell didn't describe what would happen if Scrim's discovery didn't pan out. Sometimes it was enough to let an underling imagine his own punishment.
Stop fussing over me, Johann,
Hans growled for what seemed the 100th time. This time, a fit of coughing didn't spoil his insistence that he was all right. Ensconced within one of the finest rooms in the Crown and Two Chairmen, the smuggler had spent the last 2 days virtually bedridden, plagued by fits of coughing and the interminable scratching. He made for an amusing sight, the hardened Dockland rogue who had boldly defied Gustav Volk and the Vesper Class organization, now partially sunken into an overstuffed mattress of dainty pastels and frilly lace. At least Hans would have made for an amusing sight if it weren't for his deathly pallor and the hollowness of his cheeks. The remaining members of his band, minus the still missing Kempf, were gathered around the bed like mourners at a wake. Their expressions as grave as that of a dwarf told the beer. Their expressions as grave as that of a dwarf that had been told their beer had run out. There's a typo there, sorry guys. His brother's expression was the dourest of them all. Johann had heard rumours about Kleiner being very ill before the watch had come for him. The big man might have caught nearly everything down in the sewers, and he might have shared his infection with Hans before Bayer came calling on him. Hans seemed to read his brother's thoughts. He gave Johann what was supposed to be a cheery smile. The effect was rather spoiled by the anemic condition of his face. "I'm fine," he insisted. "Just a bit tired is all. Too many late nights," he added with a lascivious wink. The women perched at the end of the bed made a loud harumph at the comments and rolled her eyes. Argula Cranach was blonde, buxom, and built like an Amazon. Her looks were on the harsh side, not quite manly, but neither the appearance of Detlef's Cirque heroine. She reminded Johann of statues he had seen of the warrior goddess Myrmidia. Her cheeks were brightly painted, her face thickly powdered, as she tried to hide too many years of hard living and ill repute. Even so, as Johann considered it, she was a damn sight too decent to be entangled with his manipulative sibling. As part owner of the Crown and Two Chairmen and sole proprietor of the tavern's upstairs brothel, she was a damn sight closer to being legitimate than Hans. And for all her shrewdness in business, she was as naive and helpless as a Shalian nun when it came to matters of the heart. Argula and Hans enjoyed an on-again, off-again relationship. That is, Hans enjoyed it while Argula simply suffered through the storm. When Hans was flush, when his luck was high and his pockets full, Argula and her tavern were the last places he wanted to see. When things were bad, when the watch was hounding him, or the loan sharks looking to break his legs, Hans always turned to Argula for help. Like an idiot, she always took him in, hiding him until things cooled down. Then Hans would be off again, leaving a mouthful of empty promises and false hopes behind. Johan always felt the woman would be better off taking in some back alley cur. Of course, under the current circumstances, Johan had to admit the masochistic relationship was like a gift from Renaud. In need of a new hideout, the Crown and 2 chairmen was about the best the smugglers could ask for, even if the girls were remaining staunch in their policy of not extending further credit to the men. Argula tended Hans with the doting affection of a mother hen, worrying about his health even more than Johan. It had been by her suggestion that Johan and the others had come into the Madame's boudoir to see for themselves their leader's condition. It was anything but reassuring. Late nights, she scoffed, adjusting her bodice. The garment clung to her ample frame so tightly, Johan wondered if she knew some trick to keep it from breathing. For which of us, Hans? You're coughing your lungs into my hair, or me trying to sleep through the racket? Now, don't be coy, my love, Hans scolded her. His lewd smirk vanished into a fit of coughing. Argula rushed to coddle the smuggler, crushing him into her breast and trying to massage his back at the same time. I understand you have a surgeon on the premises, Johan said, intruding upon the scene. Perhaps it is time we sent for him. Argula turned her head, her eyes wide with disbelief. Gustav? That swine? The only thing Gustav Schlecht is able to handle is sewing up holes in the bouncers after a rowdy night and helping the girls with indelicate problems. I won't have that butcher touching my sweet Hansel. Hans grimaced as Argula used the diminutive name, but soon he was much more concerned with an even worse fit of coughing. The liquid that spilled from his mouth was green and bilious, smelling like raw sewage that had sat out in the sun for a week. Müller grabbed at his nose and hurried to open the room's window. Argula, we can't help him, insisted Johan. Much as we'd like to, we just don't know how. Argula closed her eyes, rocking Hans slowly back and forth in her arms. A hard woman, she was trying her best to fight back a show of feminine weakness. Johan saw the tears anyway. He turned away from the woman, joining the other smugglers beside the open window. Next to the stench of whatever Hans had coughed up, even the smell of the streets was refreshing. Johan tapped his fingers against the windowsill, his mind lost in thought. From below, the racket of drunken university students, the clatter of carts, and the shrill voice of a street corner activist declaiming the evils of Bretonian brandy rose to invade the room. Trust the crackpot agitator to choose the corner outside the tavern for his soapbox. He needs a physician, Johan told his comrades. You heard Argula, Wilhelm said. She won't let this man Schlecht anywhere near Hans. Johan clenched his fist. Then we'll need to get someone else is all, he growled. Someone else? Müller scoffed. You expect doctors to just come dropping out of every harlot's bed in the place? I'll have to go out and fetch one, Johan said. Müller shook his head, his one good eye narrowing into a squint. Look, I know he's your brother and all, but use your head, man. Where do you think Kempf is? The watch might have done for Kleiner, but I wager my bottom teeth Kempf is spilling his guts to Volk as we speak. Anybody sees you on the street, it's all of our necks. Johan glowered at Müller, then favoured Wilhelm with the same challenging look. Try to stop me, and you won't have to worry about Volk. Two men backed away, and they knew only too well Johann's skill with the blade. Together, they might be able to take him at such close quarters, but one of them wouldn't walk away to brag about it. Neither of the smugglers wanted to chance being the unlucky one. Johann marched to the door. He paused on the threshold. Keep an eye on things, Argula, he said. giving a meaningful look to his skulking companions by the wheel. "I'll be back soon with a real physician for Hans." There was nothing else to be said, and Johann wasn't of a mind to waste more time questioning the wisdom of what he was doing. Rapidly, before common sense could really start to nag at his conscience, Johann descended the carpeted stairway that connected brothel and bar, navigating his way through perfumed halls and eager university students. He was through the tavern almost as soon as his feet left the bottom step, pushing his way out the batwing doors and into the foggy streets of Altdorf. He paused only for an instant outside the tavern, trying to get his bearings. A soft voice beside him brought Johann spinning around, his sword in his hand. A small, shivering man backed away, pamphlets falling from his hands as he tried to display his lack of weaponry and malice. "Peace, good sir," the little man said. Johann recognized the voice as that of the agitator who had been making speeches outside the tavern. "I mean no offense. I am quite harmless, I assure you." "Then what do you want?" Johann demanded, his sword remaining poised to run the agitator through. "I am Ludwig Rothfels," the agitator introduced himself, "a prophet of the streets, wise in the ways of cut to the chase before something else gets cut." Rothfels smiled nervously. Quite so. I understand your brother is sick and you are in need of a physician." Johann took a step towards Rothfels, ready to run the man through right then and there. Then he remembered the open window. It was possible the little sneak had heard the smuggler's discussion by mere chance. It was, of course, equally possible he was one of Volk's informants. Sweating, Rothfels seized Johann's moments of delay. "For a small gratuity, good sir, say 3 pieces of silver, I could bring a healer back to this establishment. I could do this far more quickly than you could, for you see, I happen to know of a healer who will come in here like that." Rothfels paused and snapped his fingers. "Should I ask her too?" Johann asked, suspicion in his voice. Yes, good sir," Rothfels stammered. "You see, I don't know any physicians, but there is a priestess of Shalia who shares a mutual acquaintance. The ties that bind us are quite strong, I assure you. If I ask a favor of her, she will be honor-bound to come." "A Shalian priestess?" Johann scoffed. "Do not mock the powers of the gods," Rothfels replied, deliberately mistaking the reason for Johann's doubt. "Shalia has been ministering to the sick and wounded long before these book-smarts quacks started meddling with things." Something about the agitator's tone made Johann decide the man was on the level, or at least running an honest hovel. Something about the agitator's tone made Johann decide the man was on the level, or at least running an honest hustle. "All right, little man," he said, fishing a pair of silver coins from his pocket. "I'll play your game. Bring your priestess. If you could have here before I find a physician, I might even give you the other coin you asked for." Ludwig snatched the coins from Johann's open hand. Sketching a hasty bow, he hurried off through the fog. He had to make a report to the master and pass word to Sister Kleifoth. Ludwig was quite pleased with himself. He had not only verified that the Dietrich brothers had returned to their old haunt, but had also arranged matters so that another of the master's servants would be able to keep tabs on the smugglers from within. Kempf was sprawled in one of Otto Ali's rickety bunks, a clay pipe dangling from his numbed lips. The smuggler had lasted only a few days before he started to feel the urge to return to the drug parlour. He'd been forced to return to the cellar of the Orc and Axe, using care and caution to elude any watchers Gustav Volk might have posted around the tavern. Another shard of weird stone broken off from the rock hidden in the barrel of vinegar, another visit to Hotfoot the Mouse, and Kempf was ready to chase the dragon once more. Otto Ali had been more friendly than the last time Kempf had come to him, even going so far as to admit him into one of the small private alcoves normally reserved for guild masters and aristocrats, the prestigious patrons of the den who could not afford to be seen in such places. The black dust tasted as sweet as before, filling every pore of Kemp's body as he drew it into his lungs. The dingy surroundings, the tattered curtain that separated the alcove from the main room of the parlour, all these faded into a soft blur as the smuggler's senses were drowned beneath a tide of intoxicating warmth and kaleidoscopic swirls. Kemp's squalid reality vanished as his mind was sent soaring. When the curtain was pulled aside and Otto Ali crept into the alcove, it was more unreal to Kemp than a dream. "He has taken the dust," Otto Ali said, his voice shaking with nervousness, sweat beading his swarthy brows. Another figure stalked into the room. Something so wild and weird that even in the midst of his dust dream, Kemp managed a laugh of disbelief. It was a big rat dressed in a ragged grey robe, a bogey from nursery rhymes, one of the underfolk. To add to the unreality, the rat man sported immense curling horns and a long staff tipped with a strange metal icon. Kempf began to giggle, wondering if the thing had come for him because he had sucked his fingers as a boy. Then he lost interest in the weird figure, abandoning himself to the colours of dream. Thanquol leered at the sprawled figure of the addict, sniffing at the man's hands and hair. A cruel smile spread on the grey seer's face. Scrim was right. This wretch did smell of wormstone. The question was, where had the filthy man-thing hidden it? Thanquol was tempted to claw the information out of the maggot, but he knew that in his present condition, the man wouldn't feel even the most vicious torture. "How long?" Thanquol snarled at the anxious operator of the den. "Several hours," Otto Ali answered, being careful not to smile or make eye contact with the horned rat man. In all his long years of dealing with the Skaven, he had never encountered one that filled him with such terror as the imposing Grey Seer. Otto Ali knew the dangerous temper of the Underfolk, and wasn't about to take any chances with a creature even Scrim Nortel feared. Thanquol bared his fangs, staring down at the smuggler. "Good, good," he decided. "When the man-thing awakes, we will begin." Otto Ali raised a hand to his throat, horrified by the menacing suggestiveness of Thanquol's words. Suddenly, one of the adducts in the main parlour cried out. The scream was not unusual. Many times the dreams of the pipe smokers were not pleasant. What was unusual were the shouts of Otto Ali's guards that followed the outburst. Man and Skaven tore aside the curtain and stormed into the drug den. At the same time, the crash of steel against steel reached their ears. Thanquol's eyes narrowed with suspicion even as his glands clenched in alarm. A dark figure was in the far corner of the room, fending off a half-dozen burly humans with a pair of notched black blades. The Grey Seer could smell the odour of Skaven fur, but could not detect an individual scent. His alarm grew. Only one clan of Skaven dissented themselves. The assassins of Clan Eshin. Outnumbered, the assassin was still a blur of steel and black fur. His dark sword struck sparks from the blades of the guards when they didn't slash into the flesh behind them. In the first instance of conflict, 2 of the humans were down, the others backing away in fear. As they withdrew, Thanquol was afforded a clear look at their attacker. The Grey Seer felt another spasm of fright. No simple assassin, but Scratch Scarpaw himself. His very position as clan leader of Onder Altdorf's branch of Clan Eshin made him the deadliest killer in the entire city. Thanquol grabbed a fistful of white fur, pulling the albino storm vermin he had left to watch the entrance of the alcove closer to himself. He would have liked to have Bone Ripper with him, but the rat ogre was simply too big to fit in the drug den. Certainly the absence of Bone Ripper had factored into Scarpaw's decision to attack now.
"Get the others! Quick, quick!"
Thanquol snarled at Cratch. The apprentice nodded, but made no move to leave the cover he had found behind a wooden bunk. Thanquol ground his teeth at his minion's cowardice, but soon had bigger problems to concern him. Scarpaw had heard the Gracier's voice. The assassin spun, plunging one sword into a human's gut, leaving the weapon sheathed in a dying man's flesh. With his now empty paw, he drew 3 sharp metal discs from his rat-skin tunic. Instinctively, Thanquol dragged the right storm vermin into the path of the assassin's throwing stars. The Skaven warrior's body shivered and shook as the weapon slammed into him, their envenomed tips sending poison rushing through his veins. Thanquol tightened his hold on the living shield as he felt the body shiver and go limp. He snarled again for his minions to stop cowering behind cover and help him. Relief came from the timely action of Scrim Nortail and his underlings. The clan school Skaven flooded into the drug den, tipping bunks and addicts to the floor as they rushed the lone assassin. Willing to risk being outnumbered by the comparatively slow and ungainly human guards, Scarpaw was less inclined to take his chances with a score of vengeful ratmen. Another pawful of throwing stars downed the foremost of the snarling clan rats. Then, Scarpaw was dashing through the drug den, leaping over toppled bunks and slashing at intervening foes. The assassin seemed intent on gaining the hidden tunnel that would lead him back into the maze of passageways beneath Altdorf. He abandoned his purpose, however, when the entrance to the tunnel exploded in a shower of brick and earth. Looming within the entrance, his body almost bent double to accommodate the low ceiling, Bone Ripper glared death at the would-be murderer of his master. The rat ogre's armoured fist swung for Scarpaw, narrowly missing the assassin as he dodged away. The monster's fist smashed into the wall with the force of a steam hammer, cracking bricks into powder. Bone Ripper swung his head around, ropes of saliva dripping from his immense fangs as he growled at Scarpaw. Bone Ripper before him, Scrim Nortail's clan rats coming up behind him, and ever mindful of Thanquol's magic, Scarpaw realized his escape rested upon a matter of instants. The assassin danced away as the rat ogre lurched after him, gutting a clan rat with his sword and pushing the maimed ratman into the monster's path. Spinning away from the chittering ratkin speaking for his blood, Scarpaw lunged for the locked doorway that led into the cellar of the tea shop. A glass orb drawn from a pouch on the assassin's belt made explosively short work of the portal and the human guard beyond it. Before any of his enemies could recover from the roaring explosion, Scarpaw was darting through the debris, scrambling up the stairs to the streets above.
"No, no!"
squealed Scrim Nortail as the clan rats started to pursue.
"Man-things must not see Skaven!"
The decrepit old rat man was shoving one of Otto Ali's men after the fleeing assassin.
"Find, find!"
he snarled.
"Kill, kill!"
Reluctantly, fearfully, the men hurried to carry out the orders of their inhuman patrons. They knew what happened to those who defied the underfolk. As silence slowly regained its hold over the drug den, Clan School Skaven began to seize those addicts who had been shaken from their stupor by the violence swirling around them. These wretches would be destined for the slave market of Under Altdorf now that they had seen the Skaven. The others, still lost in their dust-fueled dreams, would be allowed to stay. Grayseer Thanquol let the limp body of the albino slump to the floor, its white fur now tinged with green from the poison of the assassin's throwing stars. He strode through the wreckage, the butt of his staff tapping menacingly against the floor. Cratch hid his head as his mentor stalked past him, the adept trying to press himself into the frame of the bunk. Thanquol gave the apprentice a spiteful swat of his claw, licking Cratch's blood from his fingers and snickering as he heard the flea yelp in pain. If he wanted to last long enough to have an accident, Cratch would need to grow a spine, and quickly. Just now, however, Thanquol had a more important victim of his wrath. As Scrim snapped quick orders to his clan rats, Thanquol approached the sneaky Ratman from behind. A blow of his staff sprawled Scrim Nortail on the floor. The old Skaven snarled, reaching for his dagger, but quickly thought better of the suicide action when Bone Ripper loomed behind the Grey Seer.
Safe secure?
Thanquol snarled through clenched fangs.
Brainless tick feeder. Where did the assassin come from?
He punctuated his words by driving the butt of his staff against the Ratman's skull, drawing blood from his temple.
Please forget, miserable Scrim,
the stricken Ratman whined.
Not Scrim's fault. Scrim would not betray great and terrible Thanquol. Clan Eshin, Scarpaw, they are traitor meat worthy of Thanquol's most holy vengeance.
Thanquol struck the grovelling Ratman again. He had a point, unfortunately. Scrim would hardly have put himself in the front lines if he's aware of the attempt to kill Thanquol. Of course, that didn't mean someone higher in the ranks of Clan Skald might not be in collusion with the assassin. Moreover, Scrim had not fabricated the human who smelled of wormstone.
Off the floor, flea biter,
Thanquol spat. He pointed a claw to the alcove where the drug-addled Kemph had slept through the entire incident.
We must now take away the man-thing and torture the hiding place of the wormstone from it before Scarpaw returns.
Scrim Nortail wiped at his bleeding head, bowing in deference to Thanquol's imperious authority.
Wise and holy despot, would it not be smart to leave the man-thing alone? It is selling bits of the stone to pay for its addiction. If we wait watch, it will lead us to the wormstone on its own.
Thanquol pondered the suggestion. It wasn't a bad idea and would save them the risk of breaking the human. Their minds were so fragile, and if the human lost his senses under Thanquol's persuasive techniques, they would lose the trail to the wormstone almost as soon as they had discovered it. The Grey Seer irritably struck Scrim's snout.
Fool,
he snapped.
What we will do is allow the human to leave. He will come back to buy more dust. Before he does, his metal tokens will be stolen from him. To get more, he will have to return where he has hidden the wormstone.
Thanquol's tail twitched in satisfaction as he considered the brilliance of his plan. Scrim rubbed at his snout, trying to hide his confusion over how the Grey Seer's idea was any different from his own. Scarpaw burst through the door of the tea shop, the slashed body of the thug who guarded it pitching headlong into the street. A thick fog swirled about the bleak streets of Altdorf, rendering even the nearest pedestrians into indistinct shadows. The sound of violence sent from scurrying for cover like a nest of frightened mice. The only one near enough to observe the assassin's inhuman shape was an old, toothless beggar crouched upon the stoop of the tea shop. Scarpaw slashed his dripping sword at the old man, shocked when the blow somehow failed to strike the withered human, scraping against the plaster wall instead of through his scrawny neck. There was no time to correct the amateurish mistake, however. Already Scarpaw could hear Otto Ali's men rushing through the shop he had just vacated. The assassin snarled defiantly at his pursuers, spinning around and launching himself into a full-bodied spring at the building on the opposite side of the street. The assassin's leap brought Scarpaw 6 feet off the ground, and the Skaven plunged his still gory blade into the wall above his head. Even as the guards scrambled to attack him, the Ratman pulled himself from their reach, using his sword to hoist himself still further up the walls and onto the roof of the building. He paused at the peak of his ascent to leer at the men who clamoured for his blood and spit in the face of the foremost of them. Chittering laughter erupted, and the assassin disappeared beyond the edge of the roof.
After him!
one of Otto Ali's thugs shouted. Already, several of his companions had started running in the direction of a low overhang. Behind them, the dishevelled old beggar who had nearly been bowed over when the thugs burst from the tea shop rose to his feet, all suggestion of infirmity and age vanishing as he straightened his body. The old beggar mirrored the renegade Ratman's actions. Launching himself at the wall Scarpaw had impaled his sword upon, but where inhuman strength and agility had enabled Scarpaw to perform his incredible escape, it was a darker power that enabled the beggar to match the Ratman's feat. The man's outstretched hands closed about the plaster of the wall, little tendrils of darkness clinging to his fingers and stabbing into the structure beneath. Like a jungle lizard, the man used claws of enslaved shadow to rapidly scramble up the roof in pursuit of the vanished Skaven. The wizard's eyes studied the expanse of tiled, shingled and thatched roofs that filled the foggy sprawl of the waterfront. Leaping from rooftop to rooftop like some enormous and loathsome toad, Scarpaw's fleeing figure could be seen. An unnatural sense of grace and balance served the Magister well in this new facet of the chase. Where the Skaven had paused to judge distances before jumping from one roof to another, the wizard automatically calculated the speed and velocity needed to carry him across the emptiness between one structure and another, and to accomplish it as easily as taking a step. Where the assassin had scrabbled to regain his balance when his foot had encountered a broken tile, or his weight had broken through a rotten shingle, the wizard's arcane powers sensed such hazards and avoided them without slackening his pace. The pursuit was swift, and soon the wizard was near enough to his prey that he could hear the Skaven's heavy breathing as the beast launched himself across the yawning chasm of a street. Scarpaw crashed against the side of the far building, his clawed hands fastening themselves about the edge of the roof and labouring to pull the assassin's mass onto the tiled surface. The Magister employed the Ratman's distress to execute his own passage across the street. The wizard twisted his body in mid-air as he leapt between the buildings, lending him greater momentum and carrying him beyond the Skaven to land in a crouch atop the tiled roof. Scarpaw pulled himself onto the roof just as the wizard rose from his crouch. The Magister fastened his dark eyes upon the Skaven's beady red orbs. The wizard made a sweeping gesture with his hand, banishing the aspect of age and poverty he had worn, revealing himself as a grey-cloaked figure with smoky eyes that matched the fog swirling about the roofs. The assassin cringed as he saw the display of sorcery, noting with something approaching horror the colour of the wizard's raiment. The Magister hissed a warning to the creature, stunning him by forming his threat in Queekish rather than any human tongue. Scarpaw answered the wizard's challenge with a bestial snarl. The Skaven tore a tile from the roof and flung the ceramic at the human's head. Moving only his right arm, flicking a sliver of shadow from his darkened fingers, the wizard cut the projectile in two. Scarpaw blinked in astonishment and horror at his opponent's speed and spellcraft. "Talk, speak, or die, die," the wizard's hissing voice warned. Scarpaw growled, flinging a tile at the wizard with either hand. Again the Magister struck at the projectiles, shattering both of the missiles. But the Skaven had already exploited the distraction. Lunging to the right, the Ratman rolled down the steep incline of the roof, launching his body at the roof of the next building to the south. Like a giant spider, Scarpaw scrambled up the incline of the opposing roof. The wizard was quick to match his enemy's maneuver and jumped to the flat peak of the roof, just as the Ratman reached the level surface. The Skaven grinned with sorry guys, long day. The Skaven grinned with ferocity as he saw that he and the wizard still shared the same relative positions. The Skaven reached down to the rooftop and again removed a tile, this time with both hands. Hidden from the Magister's eyes was the substance the Skaven smeared about the back of the tile as he gripped it. The tar-like paste the assassin had removed from one of his many hidden pouches during his graceless ascent of the incline. Again, the wizard's shadow magic licked out a dark, formless blur. The darkness of the sorcery was as nothing compared to the blinding radiance as it struck the tile. The tile exploded when the shadowy bolt cleft its ceramic surface and struck the black paste smeared upon its underside. Shards of ceramic shrapnel ricocheted off the roof as the force of the explosion threw the wizard into the street below. Trying to grip the close-set walls of the buildings around him, the wizard crashed through a heavy fabric awning and into the wares of a potter's shop. Scarpaul snarled at the Magister as he pulled himself from the pile of shattered pottery. The Skaven would be off the roofs and into a sewer before the wizard could regain the rooftop. He would have liked to spare the time to settle with the meddling sorcerer, but he quailed at the prospect of facing him alone. Even Clan Eshin knew of Jeremiah Scrivener, and what they knew was enough to make even the boldest assassin afraid. Scarpaul would almost rather cross Thanquol's immense bodyguard again than risk a second encounter with the Shadowmancer. And that is the end of Chapter 7. I really hope you enjoyed that. It'd be great to hear from you in the comments below, and I look forward to speaking to you all again very soon. Goodbye.